Well, here we go with your Wednesday and Thursday news and notes for the Phil Steele Plus tour. Got a couple of free selections for you and some interesting things that I came upon during the week. So let's get started with that. We're going to start off with, let's take a look at upcoming fantasy players for this week. I got one I want to point out, and we're going to click on, this is how you use Phil Steele Plus, by the way. You come over here and click on the team pages. When you click on the team pages, I'm going to put Iowa State on one side. We're going to put Kansas on the other side here for the team pages. And the reason you might, if you have a fantasy football team, college football, you might want to draft this guy. I think he's probably available in a lot of spots. It's Breece Hall of Iowa State. Now, when I talked to Coach Campbell, he had thought Breece Hall could potentially be a breakout player. And one really good thing about the site is these individual player stats. You can see how the player's done all year. Well, Hall had 47 yards in the opener against Northern Iowa. That wasn't really used much the next 4 weeks. All of a sudden against West Virginia, 132 yards, 183, 76, 110, 101. And these were against defensive Texas, Oklahoma. So he's been playing some decent defenses in this stretch. But as you can tell, 4 100-yard games out of the last 5. So if you come up here and look at the individual stats, you're not going to be overwhelmed at 686 yards at this point in the season. But when you click here, you can see that's all been mostly in the last 5 weeks. Now, he's taking on a Kansas defense. You guys know I like to just glance at the numbers. The beautiful thing about Phil Steele Plus, you don't even know what team it is. You just glance at the numbers, and you can say, well, this team's got a weak rush defense. Look at all those red numbers there. The red means bad numbers. The green means good. Look at Kansas's rush D over the last 4 weeks, giving up 259 yards per game, 5.4 yards per carry. On the season in Big 12 play, 259, 5.4. Do I think Iowa State can run the ball? Yes. Who's been their workhorse running back? Look at last game. 24 carries for Hall, 4 for Brock Purdy. One other running back got 1 carry against Texas. They found their man. Start of the year, they didn't know who to use. Purdy had 9. Nwangu had 6. Purdy was the top rusher here with Crony. So they used some different guys early on. It's the Breece Hall show right now. So I would say if you're playing fantasy football, go ahead and take Breece Hall this week. Should have a big week for Iowa State. All right, let's take a look at a couple other things. Take a look at this Nebraska-Maryland game. Now, this is not an official play, but something I wanted to point out to you about the last 4 weeks when I was going through it. Now, Maryland's the team on the right, is at home, so we're going to put them the team on the right. And over here, we're going to go ahead and click Nebraska as the team on the left. As you know, that's the way I like to look at them. Go through every matchup, usually 2 to 3 times. And so I'm looking at this, and you can glance back and across here. I want to look at the last 4 weeks. Now, Nebraska's lost their last 4 games. Maryland's lost their last 4 games, so they're both bad teams, right? Well, actually, Nebraska's minus 39 yards per game in that span. Maryland's minus 272 yards. They're giving up 514 yards per game. Now, Nebraska's 459 is not great, but it's better than 514. And offensively, there's no comparison. I want to show you about Martinez here, a quarterback for Nebraska. As you can see, he's the guy at the top. Martinez did not play against Minnesota, did not play against Indiana, did come back against Purdue, maybe wasn't quite 100%. And then last week he rushed for 89 yards and threw for 220. So they've got Martinez back. With him at quarterback, they put up 493 yards. In the last 4 weeks, they're averaging 420 yards. Maryland just 241. I think Nebraska's a pretty short underdog on the road. Now, the negative thing here would be Nebraska's lost 7 straight games against the spread. You know how I feel about streaks like that. But after being overvalued earlier in the year, it's possible that for their last 2 games of the season, it could be a little undervalued in those games. So it might be worth a look there, but it's not an official play. Now, when you go to my, when you go to the Twitter, got a lot of interesting things up there. One thing I want to point out, Dan Ellington here of Georgia State. Now, he was supposed to be out last week, and then all of a sudden he played. Now, while he played, which was great for Georgia State that he played, one thing I want to point out about that is Ellington's a guy who, and I pointed this out last week, in this game here when Georgia State took on ULM, with Ellington at quarterback, they had 24 points in 5 possessions. Without him, they had 7 points in 7 possessions. Well, last week they did put some points on the board against App State, which was good. But when we look at it a little bit closer, we see Ellington playing with this torn ACL. It goes from a guy that's a dynamic runner. I mean, he had like 1,000 yards last year. He only ran the ball twice for -7 yards. So those are probably sacks. Didn't run the ball last week. So you've got Dan Ellington back there, but he's hobbled. And Ellington, if you look at his passing game, 12 of 27 for 88 yards. While he wanted to play, he was playing against a really good defense. He was definitely not the Dan Ellington that throws for 200 yards and rushes for 100 yards in a lot of the games this year. So that's something to point out about Georgia State. Even if he plays this week, he will not be 100% playing with that injury. But when you do go to my Twitter, at PhilSteele042, you note things like this. Bob Davies says New Mexico's down to 57 scholarship players for this next game due to injuries. You can find out who the Joe Moore Award semifinalists are. Derek Mason's coming back despite their 2-8 record. Tanner Morgan, the quarterback from Minnesota, is in concussion protocol. Running back Amari Davis out for the year for New Mexico. Roll down the line a little bit here. We can find that here's some YPG things I tweeted out. Strength of wins. Miami has been eliminated from ACC Coastal but could still get to the Orange Bowl. Just a whole bunch of interesting things. So if you're looking for the latest in injuries, I usually put it up here, so make sure you check out the Twitter. It's something free, and a lot of injuries posted up there. By the way, congratulations to Frank Solich, 111 wins. He is the all-time leader in wins in the MAC. Great guy, great coach, and doing a phenomenal job there. All right, let's take a look at some other stuff here. Let's get to a play. What the heck? Let's start off with one of our two selections. We're going to go to the Mountain West. We're going to take a look at Boise State on one side. We're going to take a look at Utah State on the other side. Now, I'll show you how to use Phil Steele Plus a little bit more, some of the other things you can use. When you go and click on the opponent down here, what will pop up is the last 22 years matchups. And as you can see, Boise State has just absolutely dominated this series against Utah State. 15-1 straight up. Once again, the green means they won the game. Red means they lost. Over here, the green means they covered the game. Red means they lost. So 15-1 straight up, 13-4 ATS. You could tell that at a glance. And you can also see here by the amount of red for the home team. Win means they won straight up. Loss means that the home team lost straight up. Green means the home team covered. Red means the visitor covered. So the visitors actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 3. And you can see all this at a glance. And the beautiful thing is it takes you over the last 22 years of this series. Now, in this game, a couple other things to point out. When you look at these wins, only one was by less than 7 points. Boise's only laying 8 points here, so that's a nice thing. Now let's go back to take a look at this year's stats and see something I was looking at. Utah State's rush offense. They were pretty dynamic early in the year, but look at this. The last 4 weeks, they're averaging 96 yards per game rush, 2.8 yards per carry. That's not going to win you a lot of football games. They did play two big boys from the Mountain West in Air Force and BYU. Well, BYU's not in the Mountain West, but they are a better team. Lost by 24, lost by 28. So now they're taking on Boise, a team that, as you know, does great as an away favorite, so that's always another plus to have there. And at quarterback for Boise, yeah, they have been moving him around. Bachmeier was here, got injured, which hurt him. Came back here, but then didn't play the next 2 weeks. I don't know if he's going to play or not. Love is questionable as well, though. Love went out in the last game, and so Henry Colombi got in there and hit 3 of 6 for 35 yards. Now, last week, Jalen Henderson started because Cord was out as well. Henderson hit 15 of 28 for 292. These individual stats are vital if you're handicapping. Really get your pulse on the team. I also want to see if the starters are updated for this team here. That would be nice. This gives you an updated start chart. You can see they've had a little change here at the right tackle spot during the year. Right guard's been consistent all year. Left tackle's had one change in here. So you can see the changes at a glance. By the end of the season, we'll have these things color-coded in red for players that are out for the year, which would be very nice. I'm just trying to show you some different ways to use Phil Steele Plus. But bottom line, you got a Boise State team that plays great on the road. It's a big game. Utah State's struggling to run the football. The series history is completely Boise. It's a series history play. I'm going with Boise State minus the 8 over Utah State in this one. Another interesting thing to point out, I watch all the networks during the course of the week. You know, the SEC network when they break down the games, the Big Ten network, the ACC network, Pac-12 network when they break down the games. You get a lot of little tidbits. And I was listening to the SEC network, and they said, hey, Georgia hasn't topped 27 points since the start of October. And that's true. 21, 27, 24, 21, 17. Last time they topped 27 points was against Tennessee way back on October the 5th. So it's been over a month for Georgia, a national title contender, to even top 27 points. 27's their high. And that came in a game they only gained 339 yards. In fact, over the last 4 weeks, Georgia's only averaging 315 yards per game. Now, as I pointed out during the Florida week, everybody's talking about Florida's defense. Georgia's defense is better. They are. And everybody's talking about Auburn's defense, but Georgia's defense, look at this, on the season, they were holding opponents to 133 yards per game, 267 total yards for this series, or for the season. No big-name stars, but what Georgia has is a great defense, and that's really what's got them where they are right now. A couple of go versus streaks. Take a look at the Sun Belt. We go to Texas State. I pointed this out last week that Texas State, I thought had played competitively in a bunch of games this year, but was actually 0-7-1 or 0-8-1 against the spread versus FBS foes. Make it 0-9-1. They lost to Troy last week. Another point spread loss. And when you play on a streak, you win many times, you lose only once. Texas State's playing App State this week. You might want to take a look at App State. And the other one, we're going to go to the MAC. Let's find this team here. And this is the spread streak of all spread streaks. Akron has not only lost all 10 games, including this game where they lost to Massachusetts by 8 as a favorite, but they have lost all 10 games against the spread. Eastern Michigan just beat them 42-14. So this is a team that's 0-10 against the spread. They're playing Miami of Ohio on the road in their next game. That comes up on Wednesday. You might want to keep that in mind and plan a streak. I mean, if you had started, let's say, after 4 games, said, hey, they're on a 4-game streak, you would have won 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. When you plan a streak, you win many times, and guess what? You lose only once. Before I get to your second play, take a couple more things we're going to take a look at here. Let's talk NFL for a minute. When you go to the NFL, not the team pages, just go to the NFL. We're going to click on the NFL info. You can get the strength of wins, pain of losses. And I haven't really looked at these this week, so let's see what we got here. What this does is you get credit for every opponent that you beat. So like here, for example, the Packers have wins over Chicago has 4 wins, Minnesota with 8, Denver with 3, Dallas with 6, Detroit with 3, Oakland with 6, Kansas City with 7, Carolina 5. Those teams total 42 wins. That's the most in the NFL. You go to a team like Buffalo, great record this year, but Buffalo's only got credit for 15 wins because they've been beating a lot of weak opponents. That's a big difference, 42 wins to 15. So that's that I find fascinating. And then when you go down here, this adds up to credit for the losses. Washington's lost 9 games to teams that have lost 38 games. That's pretty bad. And down here, it adds them up. So as you see, San Francisco comes up 30-2. And Green Bay has 42-12, which is close, but still a slight edge of Frisco in this week's big matchup. And at the bottom, I think you'll find it fascinating to see that the let me see what team. I thought Buffalo is down here somewhere. Detroit is down here. Chicago, no, Tampa. LA, Chicago, 15-24. Oh, actually, Buffalo's 15-12. They haven't lost a lot of games this year either, so they're not too bad in this category. It's the other category that they're in, and for that one, we're going to take. By the way, this is posted every week on philsteele.com, and when you go there, you can also get the YPG. Now, what this does, it breaks down the yards per game versus opponent averages. So if an opponent comes in averaging 350 yards per game and you hold them to 300, you held them to 50 yards below their season average. And it doesn't include the game you played against them. So number 1 in the NFL still remains the San Francisco 49ers. And this is something I want to point out about this week's big game that they have against Green Bay. San Francisco is number 1 in averages. They're holding opponents and gaining 15 above and holding opponents to 92 below. Add those two together. They are plus 107.6 in the yards per game. The Green Bay Packers, minus 15.1. They're way down here. They're in the bottom half of the NFL. Yet when you look at the line on this game, San Francisco's a 3-point favorite. That's saying that the two teams are equal. This is saying the two teams are not equal. It is Aaron Rodgers versus San Francisco, but that says the YPG is pretty strong on San Francisco in that one. But that's an interesting chart to use as well. The college offensive and YPG, Ohio State's at the top, but right behind them, Clemson. A big drop-off after those two. Those two are both 300-plus above season average. Wisconsin's down here at 228. Alabama, a couple teams you might find interested. Iowa State. They got a bunch of losses this year, but they're plus 179 yards per game. Auburn, plus 171 yards per game. Not far behind Alabama. That should be a great Iron Bowl game that they got coming up. And I think on the Friday tape, I'll share with you the advanced lines that we have for those games for this upcoming weekend. And, of course, as soon as I get them, I'll post them on the Twitter as well, at Phil Steele 042. Notre Dame's up here. TCU, bad record this year, but TCU is number 17 in the country in yards per game. They're holding opponents to 115 yards per game below their season average, ninth best in the country. Take a look down here at teams at the bottom, and the one I wanted to point out, Illinois has clinched a bowl bid already. Illinois is number 114, minus 93 yards per game versus their opponent averages this year. Now, the key for Illinois, if you want to take a look, is, first of all, they've got a lot of comeback yards, which would make that even cheaper. Remember that big comeback they had against Nebraska? They had a big comeback against Michigan. Then, of course, the super comeback against Michigan State, which came to win. But look at this turnover category. They are plus 14 on the year. So they've been benefiting from a lot of turnovers this year. And the yards per game just not there. They're minus 77 yards per game on the season so far this year. All right, let's get to your final thing. I'm going to get you a free play. Once again, we're going to take a look at a Florida Atlantic. And for this one, I'm going to use ESPN for a little bit of help here. I love the ESPN site where it has the scores and the stats. And you learn a lot of different things. I go through the play-by-play of every single game. If I watch them all on TV, but then I go through the play-by-play of every game every week for every team. And it's something fascinating I found about Florida Atlantic, and I'll share that with you now. And we're going to take a look at the end of the Florida International game. So let's go ahead and call up our ESPN site here and look at the play-by-play, Florida Atlantic, Florida International. Let's keep in mind the score's 37-7. Excuse me, at the end of the game. Florida Atlantic's got the ball. They go on an 84-yard, 11-play drive. You're up 37-7. Second and goal at the 8. This time is off. There's probably 7 seconds left in the game. They're throwing the football. Throws the football to right, hoping to get a touchdown. They get stopped at the 7. And that reminded me of their bowl game back in 2017. This whole team reminds me of their bowl season. But if we go back to 2017 and we click on the bowls, I want to show you something on this Florida Atlantic game. They're playing Akron. And in that game, in the bowl, if we click on the play-by-play, you can go down to the end of the play-by-play. Florida Atlantic is up 50-3. And by the way, Akron has pulled all of their starters. They've got the backups in the game. Here's the last drive of the game for Florida Atlantic. They take over with 2 minutes left in the game, up 50-3. They run the ball. You're going to run the ball and get out of there, right? Driscoll, pass, complete to right for 40 yards. They run the ball to Howell. Driscoll, pass, complete to right for 10 yards, down to the 29. They're still throwing the football, up 50-3 in a bowl game with 5 seconds to go in the game. So that tells you a little bit about the Kiffin attitude, which makes you feel good if you're playing him as a favorite. That late in the game, he's going to still be trying to score. I mean, every opportunity that you're on the field, you have a chance to score, why not score? And I like that. That's a good philosophy, especially if you're back in Florida Atlantic as a favorite. And much like 2017, they're covering a lot of their games as a favorite this year. They're playing UTSA this week. They're laying 20, which is a pretty stiff price, but keep in mind they're off a bye, and you could take a look over here. Playing the game off a bye in this one, so that's always nice to be fresh. They're playing in the Alamo Dome, which is a pretty cool stadium, so I think the players will be pretty psyched about that, going to play them there in San Antonio. So I think you're going to have an excited Florida Atlantic. They are minus 20. UTSA did just lose to Southern Miss by 19. They lost to A&M by 31. Quarterback Narcisse is playing better. If we go under individual player stats, you'll see that Narcisse in his early starting right after he took over for Frank Harris, who went out with injury. You can see that here at a glance. Wasn't throwing the football well. Is coming off a big passing day against Southern Miss. So that would make him a little bit dangerous, but they're still minus, if you look at CUSA play, minus 71 yards per game. Florida Atlantic is plus 98 yards per game. My computer only has them about a 22-point favorite. And they're laying 20. But like I said, looking at the way that Kiffin operates late in the game, you got to like playing a favorite that's going to be throwing the football late in the game and trying to score every time that they're on the field. All right, that'll do it for your Wednesday, Thursday update with your 2 free selections. Your 2 free selections here were Boise minus 8, Florida Atlantic minus 20. I'll be back with you on Friday. Friday afternoon, early afternoon, I'll have for you or even in the morning potentially, I'll have the Friday Phil Steele Plus Tour with selections. Another winning week last week for the Phil Steele Plus selections. So hopefully we can keep it rolling one more time this week. And I'll see you back on Friday. Make sure you do hit the subscribe button, give us a like, and tell us what you'd like to see.